Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report, with your eye-opener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. That President Obama's selection of former Senator Chuck Hagel as Leon Panetta's replacement for Secretary of Defense should generate controversy and outrage is hardly surprising. It was not Hagel's membership in the Bilderberg Group or the Trilateral Commission, or his support for the illegal drone strikes of the Obama regime, however, but a rather elementary declaration of fact that drew the sharpest criticism from the pundits and talking heads inside the Beltway.
I'm a United States Senator. I'm not an Israeli Senator. I'm a United States Senator. I support Israel. But my first interest is I take an oath of office to the Constitution of the United States, not to a president, not to a party, not to Israel.
Hagel's record is very, very troubling on the nation of Israel. He has not been a friend to Israel.
Senator Chuck Hagel is a top candidate to become the new defense secretary in the second Obama administration, but there is some opposition questioning Hagel's support for Israel.
Chuck Hagel, if confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, would be the most antagonistic Secretary of Defense toward the state of Israel in our nation's history.
Sadly, the idea that an American senator's acknowledgement that he is, in fact, American and not Israeli should draw such fierce criticism is not the least bit surprising. One expects there would have been no uproar at all if Hagel had merely echoed the words of Dick Armey, who stated, "My number one priority in foreign policy is to protect Israel." Perhaps America is his number two priority, he didn't say. The faux controversy surrounding Hagel's remarks has to be seen in the light of one of the most electrifying third rails of American politics, the Israel lobby. Although only ever acknowledged by the mainstream talking heads long enough for them to dismiss the very idea as conspiracy theory, the Israeli lobby's profound influence on the course of American politics is an established fact, stretching back decades. In his memoirs, President Harry S. Truman wrote of the period leading up to the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. "I do not think I ever had as much pressure and propaganda aimed at the White House as I had in this instance. The persistence of a few of the extreme Zionist leaders, actuated by political motives and engaging in political threats, disturbed me and annoyed me." Former AIPAC staff member Douglas Bloomfield has admitted that AIPAC is often called upon to draft speeches, work on legislation, advise on tactics, perform research, collect co-sponsors, and marshal votes for Congress members, and that it is common for members of Congress and their staff to turn to AIPAC first when they need information, before calling the Library of Congress, the Congressional Research Service, committee staff, or administration experts. And in her presentation to the 9/11 Revisited conference in Kuala Lumpur last November, former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney discussed the expectation for all incoming congressmen and women to sign a pledge to Israel, with the understanding that their congressional career will come to an ignominious end if they don't comply.
To be honest, I didn't even know what a Zionist was. All I knew was that I had been asked to sign a pledge for Israel when I first became a candidate for Congress. And after refusing to do so, my congressional career became trench warfare, hand-to-hand combat, just to remain in the Congress. Ever since my refusal to sign that pledge for Israel, the pro-Israel lobby let me know that my political neck was in the hangman's noose.
Discussion of the Israeli lobby and its influence in Washington tends to center on AIPAC, the largest Israel-centered lobbying group currently operating in the U.S. The oldest continually operating such lobby group, however, the Zionist Organization of America, was for decades one of the most powerful lobbying organizations in the country, helping to shape American policy toward the formation of Israel. Its members have been connected to illegal Israeli smuggling rings of both conventional and nuclear weapons technologies, and it is currently embroiled with the American government in a fight over its tax-exempt status. Founded in 1897, the Zionist Organization of America, or ZOA, is the oldest pro-Israel lobbying organization in the U.S., describing its work as educating the public, elected officials, media, and college high school students about the truth of the ongoing and relentless Arab war against Israel. and promoting strong U.S.-Israel relations, the ZOA boasts a national membership of over 30,000 and runs a campus action network and a Center for Law and Justice, in addition to its work lobbying in Washington and around the country. The group was instrumental in organizing support in Washington for the creation of Israel in 1948, and since that time has worked on numerous lobbying and media campaigns to promote Israeli interests in American foreign policy debates. As Grant F. Smith, research director of the Institute for Research Middle East Policy, reports, however, some of its top-ranking members have been involved with international weapons smuggling scandals, including the NUMEC smuggling ring, which is believed to have been responsible for shipping highly enriched uranium from the U.S. to Israel in the early stages of the Israeli nuclear program.
Right. So, presumably emboldened, you have two other ZOA officials. One of them is called Zalman Shapiro, president of the Pittsburgh chapter of the Zionist Organization of America. The other is Ivan Novik, who was later the national president of the Zionist Organization of America, teaming up with a smuggler by the name of David Lowenthal, who had extensive ties with Israeli intelligence, and forming a severely undercapitalized nuclear processing facility in 1959. What they were doing is putting together an organization that was in line to mine the most precious material on Earth at that point, which was highly enriched uranium, which the Israelis needed for their nuclear weapons program. And so in tight coordination with Israeli intelligence, NUMEC bought, for what we believe was $500, an old steel plant in Apollo, Pennsylvania, leveraged Zalman Shapiro's ties to get Navy fuel contracts to produce fuel for nuclear submarines. It quickly established this weird joint venture. So here you have this startup company, it's 3 years old, and suddenly it's in a joint venture with an Israeli entity, the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission. And curiously enough, this joint venture requires shipping irradiators and weather stations powered by small amounts of plutonium to the Israelis, sealed containers. And so, it just happens to require shipping these from, the ports of New York on Zim ships. And as it turns out, later investigation, the IAEC, the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission, NUMEC's joint venture, was simply a front for the Israeli nuclear weapons development program. And anyone who wants to look up NUMEC on the internet can see FBI affidavits of people who actually were present witnessing Zalman Shapiro, the, again, ZOA Pittsburgh chapter president, instructing his plant employees and other unknown individuals to stuff U-235 into equipment for shipment to Israel.
Recently, the ZOA lost its tax-exempt status after failing to file tax returns for 3 consecutive years from 2008 to 2010. The move draws attention to the ZOA's legal status and why it was ever designated a tax-exempt charitable organization in the first place. According to the Foreign Agents Registration Act of 1938, all agents representing the interests of foreign powers in a political or quasi-political capacity are required to register with the federal government as a foreign agent, forcing disclosure of their relationship with that foreign government and detailed access to information about finances and activities. In recently declassified documents, it was revealed that the ZOA was asked to register as a foreign agent by the Justice Department, but this never happened. In an interview on the Corbett Report last week, Grant Smith of IRMAP.org discussed the history of ZOA's status and its ability to flout the Foreign Agents Registration Act with seeming impunity.
Right. So what we're seeing here is something interesting. Al Capone was not brought down for, the horrendous act of smuggling Canadian whiskey into Chicago. He was brought down by violating, tax code. And what we're seeing here is that the Zionist Organization of America has suddenly gotten itself into a huge mess. Now, I already mentioned that it's kind of a shadow of its former self. It's still at the forefront, the extreme forefront in terms of lobbying for some of the most harmful U.S. policies imaginable. But an important change occurred in 2008 in IRS regulations concerning nonprofit organizations with tax-exempt status filing their returns. They became much more strict. You had to disclose a lot more, particularly about money that was moving overseas. It wouldn't be enough anymore to tell the IRS, like AIPAC and other organizations did, oh, we're sending money over to the Middle East and North Africa. No, you actually had to say, no, we're sending this to our Jerusalem office subsidiary, which we're also supporting with $2 million, a year, and Dan Senior's sister is running it while he's, simultaneously lobbying. I mean, you had to disclose a lot more on the 2008 Form 990. And so for the past 3 years, the Zionist Organization of America didn't file any returns. And just like other organizations that don't file returns, after 3 years, the IRS revokes your tax-exempt status. So the ZOA is no longer a charity. And there are possibly other reasons it lost its tax-exempt status. You can only be called a tax-exempt charity in the U.S. if you have broad public support. But if you review the previous 3 years' tax returns of the ZOA, what you see is that big donors like Sheldon Adelson and others were providing, the top 10 donors of the organization were basically providing 80% of total funding, which probably doesn't meet the IRS threshold for public support. And so it could be that they managed to tip themselves into foundation status and decided that they didn't want to deal with that by actually filing any more returns. So, despite their questionable past, it may be that they're not going to be able to regain sort of their preferential status because of these issues. And so what we've done is called attention to the IRS in this 13909 complaint, saying basically, this is an organization which, pays 10% of its $3 million budget to its CEO, who's grossly overpaid, and this has been mentioned in many articles about the ZOA. 10% of the budget is spent on unspecified lobbying activities. We mentioned again, although AIPAC has tried to corral the Israel lobby ecosphere behind it as the only organization that's going to lobby Congress, the ZOA lobbies Congress and files reports that basically disclose nothing about what it's doing, and it's using tax-deductible funding to lobby. And so that may be a problem. And we've also made it clear that the IRS should consider that the ZOA doesn't have a bona fide social welfare purpose. I mean, it was always designed to create, as a political movement, a nationalist movement, to create a foreign state. And it's an organization with so much historical baggage that it should be impossible for it to really regain its former status. But the only way, and the thing that following this story, the thing that makes one much more aware of this is that the Justice Department already gave this organization a break. So what's to keep the IRS from simply letting this organization continue on its merry way? Well, all the other organizations that lose their tax-exempt status have to file a completely new application and publicly justify. You can see these applications, and you can contact the IRS if you don't think they're doing the right thing. They have to publicly justify why they should get this coveted status. And again, we don't think they ever justified this to the IRS.
What is once again interesting to note is that groups like the ZOA and AIPAC are, like the Royal Institute of International Affairs and its branch organizations, which we examined last week on the program, not secretive cabals of shadowy figures meeting in darkened rooms, but openly public organizations with a readily documentable history of flouting laws and harboring criminal elements. As with so many of these other organizations of influence, the secret to their secrecy is not that they actually keep their activities secret, but that it has somehow become taboo to even admit their existence and influence, let alone to discuss the ramifications of that influence. It will be interesting to see whether or not Hagel survives the nomination process even after the egregious sin of suggesting that he was not an Israeli senator. It will also be interesting to see if the ZOA regains its tax-exempt status, or whether it'll ever be put in the public spotlight for its possible connections to the nuclear smuggling ring. But sadly, given the history of coverage of the Israeli lobby in the mainstream American media, it is hardly advisable to hold your breath while waiting for a serious examination of the ZOA's influence in these affairs. In the meantime, as always, it is up to the alternative media and independent truth seekers to continue scrutinizing the organizations of influence that dare not be mentioned in mainstream political discourse. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com. Available now from BoilingFrogsPost.com.
You know, they arrested me for taking pictures. That was obvious. Well, they couldn't really write that in an arrest report. So they said, well, he was standing in the middle of the street. He was blocking traffic.
DNA profiles of innocent people arrested in England and Wales can now only be held by police for a maximum of 6 years.
The technological police state that we see developing today is the access to advanced methods and techniques of control.
On the ground!
This technology is not the stuff of sci-fi fantasy, but increasingly a part of our everyday lives. The new Boiling Frogs Post DVD, The Police State, available from BoilingFrogsPost.com. Including all 4 episodes of the Police State series of James Corbett's Eye Opener Report, 2 bonus Eye Opener reports, an exclusive interview with BoilingFrogsPost.com member Andrew Gavin Marshall, and a Paul Jamiel political cartoon gallery. Order your copy today at BoilingFrogsPost.com.